All right, today we're going to look at a lesson from Matthew 21, 18 through 22, entitled, If You Have Faith. And it's a very important lesson because when we study the teachings of Jesus, it's remarkable how he uses ordinary things in everyday life to kind of bring out a lesson. Things he comes upon, things he picks out of, things around him, things that are there. And uses those items, uses circumstances in life to present doctrinal truths. And in this case, he uses an unfruitful fig tree to teach a truth, to explain to the 12 apostles the need to pray with faith. Okay? And it's easy just to pray, to get into a situation where pray the same prayers over and over again. Just they become routine, so routine that we just don't really put much thought into it. So we've got to be careful. Listen to what Jesus is going through here. In the morning, as he was returning to the city, Jerusalem, it's in what's called the Passion Week. Okay. He became hungry, and seeing a fig tree on the by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but only leaves. And he said to it, May no fruit ever come from you again. And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How did the... Now, I'll explain this in a moment, okay? When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How did the fig tree wither at once? And Jesus answered them, Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, Be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. All right, we're going to break that down. What's happening in this passage? Well, to understand it, you have to go back, look what happened previously. Why in the world would we do that? Because the Bible's not made up of a lot of, can I say, inert passages. You know what I mean by inert? You know, out here there are, in the universe of things, there are inert things. There are inert gases. There are gases that don't do anything, basically. You know, they don't interact with other things. Does that make sense? Okay? The Bible's not like that. The Bible's not written in inert passages. Here's a little phrase, here's a little phrase, there's a little phrase. It's not like Grimm's fairy tales. Here's a little fairy tale and there's a little fairy. It's not like Aesop's fables. Here's a fable, here's a fable, everywhere fable, you know? No. Everything is in context. What's happened? And context is very important. Why? Because a text that is taken out of context is a pretext or a pretense. It's a lie. We see that happening in politics, right? Oh, so-and-so did this. Well, but they take it out of context, and really wasn't what was said, wasn't really what was done. So you got to go back, you got to figure out what the context was, okay? Jesus had made a grand entrance into Jerusalem in the Passover week on the first day of the week, right? Triumphal entry, right? Hosannas to the King, palm branches and clothing and riding on a donkey, all that stuff. That was on Sunday. On Monday, he goes back to Bethany, the other side of the Mount of Olives. Get the picture? The other side of the Mount of Olives. You either go around it or you go over it, right? Around it or over it. No other way unless you build a tunnel, right? Over it or under it. All right, let's get in the picture. All right, so he comes back over it on Monday morning, but he's hungry and he sees a fig tree over here. And because he's hungry, and there's a fig tree, even though it's not the time for figs, it's got leaves. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, the figs on a fig tree always come before the leaves. So if it's got leaves, it's supposed to have what? Figs. But it doesn't. He gets there and it doesn't. So what does he do? He curses it. Why? Because it looks like it's got figs, but it doesn't. It looks like it's producing fruit, but it isn't. So he curses it. He's made a wasted trip? No, not really. Not really. See, being the Son of God, he probably knew ahead of time that the tree didn't have any figs on it. But that's not what the purpose of this trip is for. He's hungry, but, you know, he could turn stones into bread. He's trying to teach a message here. He condemns the tree. Look at verse 19. And seeing a tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but leaves. And he said to it, may no fruit ever come from you again. And the tree withered at once. At that point, the fig tree began to wither. Now, verse 20. When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, how did the fig tree wither at once? If you got a tree that dies in your yard, how long does it take it to really get all?
A long time.
It takes sometimes generations. You can go out here, you can find old stumps of trees kind of like, and they're still there. But this really has gotten bad. How long? Well, overnight. Mark tells us that it was the next day that the disciples noticed the withered fig tree. Oh, what's Mark got to do with it? Oh, it's the same story. Mark's adding emphasis to it. That's why you read the different parts. You look at all the different accounts of it. It's like if there's an accident out here, you look at all the witnesses. You talk to all the witnesses. What happened here? Why? Because you want to get the full story, right? That's the way it is when we're studying the Bible also. Look at everything that's talking about that particular event. But they marveled that it had deteriorated so rapidly, so quickly. All right? So, with that understanding, how do we interpret the passage? What's going on here? Because I know what a lot of people would want to say. They want to say, if we have faith, we can miraculously move mountains. Right? That's what they want to say. So the disciples were looking at the remains of a physical tree. It's most likely Jesus was speaking figuratively, keeping in mind the unfruitful works of the Jewish religion. What had happened the day before? He'd gone into Jerusalem, right, on Sunday. Triumphal entry. They gave him a hard time, right? He comes back. What does he do on Monday morning? He curses the fig tree. Then what does he do? He goes on into Jerusalem, right? And what's he do on Monday morning? Cleanses the temple. He drives out the money changers and the people who are selling animals. It is written in scriptures, this house is to be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. You look like you're alive, and you look like you're producing fruit, but what? Spiritual fruit, but you're not. So what does he do? He curses the temple. He curses it. No stone is going to be left standing on another. Now, what he's talking about is going to happen 70 years later, but yet it's cursed. Why? Because the Jewish religion is not producing the fruit that God wants it to produce. So he's warning the 12 about people who look religious but bear no spiritual fruit. Leaves are not the fruit of a tree. Would you agree?
Amen.
That's not the fruit. They serve to keep the tree alive. They help to keep it alive. But it's the fruit of the tree that continues the lineage, that keeps trees going. The lineage of the tree going. And more trees coming after it. Now, the Jews kept things coming after them, didn't they? But remember what Jesus said about them? They would circumnavigate the seas to make disciples, and when they did, they made them what? 4 times, 6 times, whatever, the children of hell that they were? Is that what God was wanting? Surely not. If every tree in the world stopped producing fruit for any reason, you know what would happen?
We'd starve to death.
In a generation, there'd be no more trees. Once those trees died off, there'd be no more trees. What would happen if the church would stop reproducing on the earth?
They'd disappear.
This would be the last generation, wouldn't it? Now, it's not going to happen. The Bible tells us that. It's going to continue to grow. What happens if this congregation stops reproducing? Or any congregation stops reproducing?
It'll die.
It'll die. It'll be gone. Okay? So, that's kind of what we're looking at here. Okay? The Jewish religion deteriorated so badly that it was no longer producing faithful disciples. It just looked good. And reading in the book of Acts, we see how when Jesus came, the Messiah they were looking for, what did they do? They killed him. And they killed the ones who were trying to save them. What it produced was a superstitious generation. Did you ever notice that if you look at many groups that call themselves Christians, they're more superstitious than anything. They're not really religious. They're religious, but it's more superstition than it is that there's anything going on in their lives. People who did only the very basic parts of worship and service, people who trusted in the rituals, but they really have very little understanding of God's ways. It's just, okay. I talk about people who do low-hanging fruit. You know what low-hanging fruit is?
Easy.
Yeah, the easy. Let's do the easy stuff. But the hard stuff, nah, somebody else will do that. Somebody else will get the hard stuff. And that's what happens sometimes. And for us as Christians, we're called to do the hard part, the tough parts. Why? Because that's when God will really help us. That's when God will get in there with Jesus in the yoke beside us. That's when the work will really get done. That's when we can plow the ground. Okay? So, Jesus is here telling the 12 that he's pronounced a curse on the religion of the Jews, and soon they would begin to see it wither away, and they'd be amazed at how quickly that it did wither away. The Jewish religion. And again, in 40 years, what happened? The temple was gone. Jerusalem was destroyed. There's still no temple over there, is there? There's not going to be. Unless men do it, but it won't be God's will. So Christ's death, burial, and resurrection began the process that culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. So those events were really the funeral of a religion that had died at least 40 years earlier. Would you agree? The Jewish religion had died 40 years before the funeral in AD 70. Well, let's look at the promise that Jesus made to the apostles. Now, that's the only way that I can put it. Okay, and we talked about things in the book of Acts this morning, about miracles. And Jesus answered them, "Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, not a mountain, this mountain. Be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. Well, what mountain was there? What mountain were they looking at from there? It's the Mount of Olives, wasn't it? What was the Mount of Olives doing? It was standing between them and Jerusalem. Well, how are they going to get to Jerusalem?
Over or around.
They either had to go over or around it. That's the only two things. Or what?
Through it.
Through.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Be cast into the sea. Okay? But you say, Fred, why are you saying that this is figurative? Well, look who he's talking to, okay? We know the events that had happened before and what was going on, but he's talking to the apostles, and he's telling 12 of them, if you say to this mountain, be cast in the sea, it'll be done. Well, if Peter says be cast into the mountain, or cast into the sea, and the mountain's cast into the sea, is John going to say the same thing to that mountain? Which mountain is it? This mountain. Okay, we got to put the mountain back so John can do it. We got to put the mountain back so James can do it. We got to put the mountain back so... See what I'm saying? If it doesn't make sense, probably doesn't make sense. Did they understand it literally? Or did they understand, here's an obstacle that's in the way. And to get where we are going, we're going to have to pray. Now, was the mountain really the obstacle? What was the obstacle that they had to face? So it was on the other side of the mountain, wasn't it? It was that Jewish religion down there at the temple that was sick, shall we say, demented in a lot of ways, hateful, ready to kill them. That was an obstacle that they had to come upon, that they had to deal with in their lives. Were they going to be able to do it on their own? Absolutely not. They had to have a tremendous faith to overcome that obstacle. They had to be able to do the same thing as he had done to the unfruitful tree. Okay? They'd have to destroy a very powerful false religion as it presented itself. They'd have to go up against it. They'd have to, how are they going to destroy a false religion? How are you going to do it?
Faith and truth.
Truth. Truth is how you destroy a false religion. And that's what the apostles did. They were constantly fighting against Judaism and then idolatry. And victories were being won. Why? Because they proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ. Look what Paul said. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 through 8. If anyone preaches a gospel other than the one that you've heard, the original gospel that the apostles were preaching, let them be what? Accursed. Like what? Accursed like what? Accursed like what? Like the fig tree. Why? Because they're an obstacle in the way of the truth. Yep. Like a mountain. Because, hey, look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 4 through 5. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. How do you do that? Well, it's with the truth. With the truth of the gospel. Secondly, the figurative mountains, the obstacles of life, would be moved out of the way. As they're standing there looking at the Mount of Olives. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could just, if this mountain was out of the way, we could just go to Jerusalem, right? Man, wouldn't it be great if we could just get rid of all the false religions in this world? We could all go to heaven together, couldn't we? It ain't going to happen without work. It ain't going to happen without faith, and it ain't going to happen without the truth. And finally, they are told. Well, you go back and you look at Jesus and the apostles, and for each of those apostles, look at the earthly problems they had to overcome. They lost everything they had. Okay? They had to rely upon each other for the basic necessities of life. Persecution, prison, but you know what? Nothing stood in their way, did it? Nothing. Think about the Apostle Paul and what all he went through, and he was born out of due season. Think of what he went through. Now, finally, they're told, Matthew 21:22, and whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. And as always, whatever is conditioned. Conditioned on what? The will of God. God, give me what is it Janis Joplin used to sing? Lord, won't you give me a Mercedes Benz? Janice, you just wreck it. You don't need one. You loan it to some of your druggy friends, and that'd be the end of it. You don't need it. It's whatever we ask according to the will of God. He'll help us, because we'll be in the yoke with Him. So, why is it figurative? Well, you can see what the message is. You can see how literally that isn't going to happen. It wouldn't even be necessary for it to happen. But when you look at it figuratively, we all have those obstacles in life that we have to either go over, go around, or move them out of the way. Let's make sure we're on the same page with the Lord, in the yoke with the Lord, and it'll happen. Okay, the power of faith is revealed to the apostles. The power of faith as revealed to the apostles certainly had a positive effect on them as the day of the Lord's death drew closer. Now it's only going to be about, what? This is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 3 days he's going to die on the cross. But, 6 days he's going to be raised again. So we should find promise and power in these words also. Here's what we can do. You and me. You and me. Got that? You and me. We can wither false religion if we have enough faith to pray and to learn and to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can wither it. Maybe a little at a time. Maybe just our little piece of the tree. Okay? But we can do it. We can do it. Jesus said we can. We can move the obstacles in our lives if we're willing to persevere in prayer and work to bring about God's will. We can do it. We can do it. They did it. We can do it. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Do we believe it?
Yes. Amen.
You know what believing that is? You know what believing that is? Faith. Faith. Yeah. And faith is the victory that overcomes the world. We can do great things for Christ if we have faith, and doubt not. Hebrews 11:6, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Our coming to God is a continuous, day by day, walking closer than we did the day before, approaching to God. So let's live daily by the power of faith that comes by knowing, believing, and obeying God's word. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. Let's get into it. Let's get through it. Hey, and we'll get through this plague, won't we?
Amen.
We'll get